How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to join up with you one more time this week. And I am kicking off this show with the greatest news you've probably heard all week. I think you guys are going to love it. We're going to talk about that. I'll keep it a secret for the moment. We're going to talk about the Brits yanking back their COVID vaccination requirements. We're going to talk about why doctors are no longer trusted. I'll give you guys 4 guesses why. We're going to talk about how the NIH is going to be audited, hopefully. We're going to talk about the Paul Pelosi footage. We're going to discuss whether anything can be done to assuage rural rage. That'll be fun to read. We're going to talk about Jill Biden corralling President Biden to keep him from having to answer questions from journalists. We're going to talk about how Trump helped get Ronna McDaniels across the finish line. We're going to discuss how the police who killed this poor black man, over whom I'm sure there will be much rioting tonight when the video is released, were actually driven by racism, according to CNN. And we will discuss how the chief of police is not helping assuage things over there. And we'll discuss Jemelle Hill, I believe I'm pronouncing her name right, and how she's still trying to further the racism card in this case. And finally, we'll end with some super good news as Florida brings down the book on the pediatric group who now has to provide evidence for why exactly they thought it would be a good idea to transition children and try to get them to have some accountability. We are not preggers yet. Thank you for asking. Ooh, I apologize for my hair. I had it in a bun all day today. You will just have to bear with whatever is happening here. Let's look at this first story you guys are going to love. How you can get paid $1,000 to eat cheese before bed as part of a new study into nightmares. Ooh, I saw somebody comment that eating cheese right before bed led to good dreams for them. I don't know about you guys. You guys tell me what happens when you eat cheese right before bed. I'm very curious myself. I kind of want to try. I looked at this study and I saw that you have to sleep alone. And I was like, okay, well, I'm done with my time sleeping alone. I spent way too much of the previous 8 years sleeping alone, much more than I should have. So I was like, no, this is not it for me. But if you guys tend to sleep alone, you should definitely check this out. Researchers are offering Americans $1,000 to participate in a 3-month study to test whether there's any truth to an old wives' tale. The mattress review site Sleep Junkie is keen to know if different cheeses can cause nightmares if eaten directly before bed. 5 chosen cheese testers will be given a list of cheeses to eat from home and told to log their dreams and nightmares, sleep quality, and energy levels. This just sounds like a great study all around. I want to study where I have to eat cheese. I do it anyway. They will each be paid $1,000 and have the cost of the cheese reimbursed. Delightful. Applicants must be at least 21 years old, own a smartwatch or fitness tracker that monitors sleep, must have a consistent sleep schedule, not suffer any sleep issues, and not have a dairy or lactose intolerance. I noticed the Daily Mail forgets to mention that you should also be sleeping alone. Blue, hard, soft ripened, and processed cheese will be included on the list, as well as vegan and lactose-free cheese. Gross. The lucky 5 will have to eat each type of cheese at the same time every night before going to bed for a week, with a week's break between each cheese to ensure accurate results. Sounds like a lot of fun. You guys should definitely check it out. If you are single at this time, this might actually be for you. I think that cheese is the food of the gods and would love to participate in this survey or this study. Except that I'm obviously not sleeping by myself. So I thought that was a great story to start out with. There's finally some good news in the world, and that news is that you can get paid to eat cheese. That's fantastic. I don't think eating cheese before bed causes nightmares. Well, this study is going to find out if it does. Let's go. Wow, sour lids locks. Yeah, so I had my hair in a bun today because I was doing a bunch of chores and taking my walk and everything. So it's all, I don't know what's going on, but you guys have to live with it. Ha 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 ha. Okay, so let's talk about what the British are doing about their COVID vaccination requirements. Brits yank back COVID vaccination program as U.S. plunges forward with one-size-fits-all strategy. So this touches on the Veritas video, which was very interesting. Undercover video of purported Pfizer executive discussing how to mutate SARS-CoV-2 to keep vaccine cash cow going prompts investigation demands by Senator Ron Johnson. Good. The U.S. one-size-fits-all COVID-19 vaccination strategy is becoming even more of an international outlier, with the UK's decision to stop giving boosters to people under 50 who are not in a clinical risk group and ratchet back primary series vaccination as well. The Brits' same-day acceptance of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunizations recommendations Wednesday, excuse me while I fix my microphone, stands in stark contrast to the FDA's oft-adversarial relationship with its Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, which has been given limited information before votes on COVID vaccine authorizations, overruled, or simply excluded from any role in key FDA decisions. The strategy change comes as an undercover video by Project Veritas purports to show a Pfizer executive admitting they were trying to mutate SARS-CoV-2 through directed evolution in monkeys to keep COVID a, quote, cash cow for the pharmaceutical company, and that is pretty damning. While Jordan Walker scrubbed his LinkedIn profile of all corporate references following the attention, he appears in screenshots as Pfizer's Director of Worldwide R&D Strategic Operations and mRNA Scientific Planning since June 2021, so this would be the guy to make those calls. That was immediately preceded by a year and a half as a consultant focused on biopharma growth strategy at Boston Consulting Group, which sponsored his Mandarin language and business immersion from November to December 2019 on the cusp of the Wuhan COVID outbreak. Wow, this guy has everything. He was in Wuhan, apparently. He was a consultant focused on biopharma growth strategy. If all this is true, then what he said on video to Project Veritas, and he did break the iPad, so I'm inclined to believe that part of what he said was true for sure, and he felt very caught out. Really, really interesting stuff. Senator Ron Johnson cited the video Thursday in his call for Congress to thoroughly investigate vaccine manufacturers and the entire COVID vaccine approval process run by federal health agencies that have been captured by Big Pharma and grossly derelict in their duties throughout the pandemic. Pfizer didn't answer a Just News query. Well, of course they didn't. Pfizer has me blocked on Twitter too, so they will hide away from anybody pretty much at this point, it seems. Let me make sure my chat is live chat, not top chat. Ron Johnson tweeted, "Federal health agencies have been captured by Big Pharma and grossly derelict in their duties throughout the pandemic. It's time for Congress to thoroughly investigate vaccine manufacturers and the entire COVID vaccine approval process." 100%. Europe's vaccination approach has long been more tailored than the U.S. Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland have either banned Moderna's vaccine under age 30 or 18 due to increased heart risks or recommended young people take Pfizer's vaccine. The UK Health Security Agency emphasized to the Epoch Times in September that its vaccine offerings for children 5 through 11 not in clinical risk groups from February to August 2022 was a one-time, non-urgent offering. Only 7 countries had authorized vaccines for children under 5, none in Europe, when Insider reviewed different global regimes last spring. The U.S. soon followed, with the FDA promising congressional Democrats it would lower approval standards if needed. Wow. The Brits' announcement Wednesday unintentionally highlighted their vast divergence on vaccine strategy from the Yanks, who repeatedly promoted the jabs as a brake on transmission and demonized holdouts as threats to their communities. Parliamentary Undersecretary for Health and Social Care Maria Caulfield said the decision followed naturally from the UK's focus on reduction of severe disease, hospitalization, and mortality across the population while protecting the capacity of the National Health Service. Boosters for ages 16 through 49 will end February 12th, the close of the autumn 2022 vaccination campaign, except for those in a clinical risk group. Otherwise healthy 5 through 49-year-olds can get a primary series or booster in the next seasonal campaign if they develop a new health condition that puts them in clinical risk. This is way, way, way better than what the U.S. does. The U.S. has such a freaking blanket approach, and I've always said that we need to prioritize people who are in the highest risk groups, and this was called, I forget what this is called, I can't remember the name, the Great Barrington Declaration, I think it was called, because they said we needed to focus on older people and people who are actually at risk of having severe responses to COVID-19, and what we did instead was, for example, We villainized people who didn't want the vaccine, who weren't at risk, who just wanted to work and to continue to keep their businesses afloat. And we did not choose to protect children from all of this stuff. And it's just incredibly disturbing to me. Children were never at risk for COVID-19. We knew this right from the beginning. One of the earliest things we knew for sure was that kids were not at risk for this. Yet we still pushed on and we were giving vaccinations to people, I believe, as young as 6 months old, possibly just as young as 5 years old. But there is good news. Wait, let me switch to this one first. Americans deserve to know where their tax dollars are being spent. Senate GOP introduces a bill to install a watchdog in the NIH after an audit raised major concerns about its links to the Wuhan facility at the center of the lab leak. This is Senator Marsha Blackburn, whom I appreciate and respect immensely. She is spearheading a fight to increase NIH oversight. The bill would establish an Office of Inspector General to monitor federal grants, and it comes after an audit found the NIH lacked key oversight of risky virus tests in China. There's a reason this stuff is done in China, and that's because it's not legal to do here. If I understand correctly, if you guys know differently, let me know, but that was my previous research. It was very interesting. Look, they're all puffy. The Wuhan Institute of Virology contains high-level biosecurity labs that conduct research on dangerous pathogens. Fascinating. With improved oversight, NIH may have been able to take more timely corrective actions to mitigate the inherent risks associated with this type of research. It looked at 3 taxpayer-funded research grants awarded to the now notorious EcoHealth Alliance, run by British scientist Peter Daszak between 2014 and 2021. The report found the National Institute of Health and EcoHealth failed to understand the nature of the research conducted, identify potential problem areas, and take corrective action. So this is just, to me, just looks like more rank incompetence, because if they don't actually know what's being done there, how can they even say for sure that they know that nothing harmful is being done? Really, really disgusting stuff. Incompetence is always our biggest enemy, even more so than evil. Like, we can point our fingers at Klaus Schwab and everybody in that camp, but at the same time, incompetence might be what gets us in the end. But all of this has had an effect on the public's opinions of the medical profession. So let's read this. This is something that I actually didn't expect. I remember when I worked in the hospital, I would look at the in-services and I said, oh, you're not allowed to tell people that obesity is bad? Yeah, I can see wokeness coming here real soon. How woke broke medicine. Public support for doctors has plunged by double digits, driven by conservative ire over trans surgeries for kids, masks, and cringeworthy oaths. Yeah, we covered one of those cringeworthy oaths back in October, I think. Doctors, nurses, and pharmacists have seen approval ratings nosedive. Physicians saw a 15-point drop from the start of the pandemic until now. It coincides with a rapid progressive reshaping of the sector, experts warn. Nurses and even pharmacists have also seen their approval ratings nosedive. They're all still far ahead of other professions like lawyers, bankers, and accountants, but the decline is stark and worrying. Discontent is especially acute among Republicans and comes in as ever more parts of society are sucked into the culture wars that are making America more divided and less stable. Yeah, for sure. Maybe they should stop pushing the culture war if they want this to stop. Medicine has not been spared, with rows erupting over transgender care for children, the instruction of woke oaths at medical schools, and masking, vaccines, and other public health moves during the pandemic. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis leads the charge against wokery in schools, but has also attacked mask mandates and vowed to probe wrongdoing by the National Institutes of Health and other national health bodies. Good. Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania's medical school, said inconsistencies in public health messaging in the pandemic and parents' fury over trans care had roiled the sector. Yeah, for sure. Maybe they should adjust what they're doing. These have combined to make the public less confident about the recommendations by medical experts, added Dr. Goldfarb, also board chair of the medical campaign group Do No Harm. Healthcare is in a crisis driven by political ideology. The solution is an evidence-based approach and reliance on strong scientific principles in order to clarify what care serves patients best. For many, there were too many overly strict COVID rules that were kept in place too long, particularly for school kids. Still others complained when the Centers for Disease Control in 2021 said vaccinated people could take their masks off. So you got complaints from both sides of the aisle. I don't even want to read about Anthony Fauci, but on the topic of reopening schools, the lady who wrote the article about pandemic amnesty, I believe her name was Emily Oster, she was always against shutting schools down for COVID. And honestly, I respect that immensely. I don't think she's on the right track as far as pandemic amnesty goes. She could possibly be just one of those rubes who really thinks that they did everything out of the goodness of their heart. I personally don't believe that, and I don't think that many on the right believe that either. So she's going to have to fight an uphill battle on that count, but who knows what happens? We'll see. There's a possibility that we just forget all this stuff, but there were people out there who were calling for unvaccinated people to die. And we looked at what happened to some of those people. It wasn't always the best choice to make because it turns out what you say seems to slightly bend reality a little bit, and some of those people ended up suffering severe consequences as a result of their touted vaccine status. But who knows? In any case, people's opinions of the medical field have dropped precipitously, and that's actually not good. There was a point in time where I would have said that that's a positive thing for people to lose their faith in a lot of these institutions, but I certainly don't think so now. I think that losing faith in these necessary institutions that we really can't live without is going to create bigger problems down the road. So hopefully they will see the light and start to have some common sense and stop doing things like pushing transgender surgeries for children. We'll see what happens there. I am not optimistic because most of the people in the medical field, many of the nurses rather, some huge percentage, like 85-88% are females. And if you look at, oh my gosh, we're going to have to look at this. I'm going to show you guys this. I think it's from Emerald Labs profession voting. Verdant Labs. Emerald Labs. Close enough. So we're going to go down to nurses. So here we can see environmentalist versus oil worker. Huge percentage of environmentalists vote Democrat. Huge percentage of oil workers, unsurprisingly, largely male, vote Republican. Flight attendants, female, blue. Pilots, male, red. Bartenders, mixed. Beer wholesaler, business owners, vote red. Librarians, females, blue. Loggers, males, red. It's almost like there's a pattern here. Interesting. Chairwoman, blue. Chairman, red. Pretty equal division. Pediatricians, largely women, blue. Urologists, largely men apparently, red. Floral designer, interesting. Yoga instructor, something like 90% blue. So this is based on their profession and figures out how they vote. Midwives are blue. Surgeons, males, are red. Gardeners, farmers, chefs, cattle feeders. Let me see. Nurses. Nurse. What? They don't have nurses on here? I'm verklempt. Oh, well, that's okay. Well, the point is that a large majority of nurses are females and they vote blue. So I will say this doesn't surprise me that people are losing confidence in this field as a whole. If you guys want to look that up, I didn't have a link for it. I just remember it off the top of my head because I love it so much. Verdant Labs, that is professions and how they vote. Really, really interesting breakdown of that study. Oh boy, let's talk about the Paul Pelosi footage because that was just released today, and we're going to talk about some other police stuff here later. Police body cam footage of Paul Pelosi hammer attack is finally released and shows intruder launch vicious assault at San Francisco home that left the 82-year-old with a fractured skull. Now, some of the stuff's a little bit graphic, so I'm not actually going to play the footage itself. I'm just going to tell you my analysis, and the Daily Mail is going to break it down for us. A San Francisco court has released the shocking police body cam footage showing the moment Paul Pelosi was violently assaulted with a hammer in his home in October. Paul, the husband of former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, was asleep at their San Francisco home just before 2 a.m. on October 28th when 42-year-old David DePop broke in and beat him with a hammer, prosecutors allege. The video shows two police officers arriving at Pelosi's home, knocking on the door and waiting around 20 seconds before it's answered. Paul, in a pajama top and boxer shorts, answers the door as he and DePop both vie for control of a hammer. They each have a hand on the weapon while Paul has a drink in his left hand. Interesting. The video was released alongside Paul's 911 call and the release of surveillance video showing the suspect outside the family's home. So here we can see Paul. I can't see the drink in his hand, but here's David. It looks like he's holding the hammer. Yeah, okay, so here's the flashlight showing the hammer. An officer asks, "What's going on, man?" DePop replies, "Everything's good." The officer says, "Drop the hammer." The suspect tells them, nope. Then Paul attempts to twist the hammer out of DePop's hand, but the suspect regains control of the weapon and begins to strike multiple times. Yeah, Paul is 82 years old. He's not going to be able to wrest a hammer from a fully grown, healthy man's hand. The two police officers rush in and tackle DePop, shouting, "Give me your effing hands." They restrain the attacker as Paul lies collapsed and prone on the floor with liquid and ice on the ground around the two men. Oh gosh. Officials later said Paul Pelosi woke up in a pool of his own blood. Well, they should have immediately got him onto an ambulance. What the heck? The indictment in the case said the blood was swelling out of the victim's head and that Paul required surgery on a skull fracture in 2 places and was treated for serious injuries to his right arm and hand. I'm sure he was, because by the time you get to be 82 years old, you're incredibly fragile and your skin is like tissue paper. I have seen people's skin tear unbelievably easily. It happened to me when I was taking care of people as carefully as humanly possible. So I'm not at all surprised that he was injured in this manner. So I suspect what happened here, the reason that Paul had a drink in his hand was probably because this guy broke in. Paul became aware of it, threw on a shirt, came downstairs, and he was probably trying to calm him and talking to him and offered him like a drink or whatever. It was like, okay, well, I'm going to have a drink even if you're not. Haha, it's fine. We're all pals here. It's no big deal. But Paul, the intruder, had gotten a hold of a hammer, probably from somewhere within the house. And then when the police showed up, proceeded to attack Paul, poor 82-year-old guy. I have sympathy for this man by virtue of him being a human being and because he was 82 years old. I do feel bad for him. That kind of sucks. I think probably the biggest takeaway from this horrible story is that, first of all, San Francisco is so bad that you can't even keep wandering vagrants out of incredibly important people's homes. And that should be a really big red flag for the people who live in San Francisco. So here we can see the broken panes and shattered glass at the back door of the Pelosi's home. So this is apparently where he came in. That doesn't look very secure. It looks like it was probably easy to get in. I was also under the impression that the Pelosi's home was monitored by DC police, but I also heard that no police officers were looking at the cameras at the time this happens. Yeah, the security video showed him breaking into the house with a hammer. Okay, so he brought the hammer with him into the house. That's what I did when someone broke into my house. I offered him a beer. He was all jacked up on drugs and had extreme anxiety. 1 beer made him relax. See, that's an interesting theory then, that's exactly what Paul was trying to do. Like, he realized obviously that something was wrong when he heard shattering glass, and this guy you can see in the video is kicking in the door. So it was obviously extremely noisy. He threw on a shirt, came downstairs wearing a shirt and his boxers. He's like, "Hey, you want to calm down? You want a little bit of alcohol to maybe depress your incredibly wound up condition?" I just find this terrifying, and I think that San Franciscans should really view this as a wake-up call, because if this can happen to Nancy Pelosi's husband, it can happen to anyone. And if someone can come in with a hammer, they can easily come in with fill-in-the-blank horrifying weapon at any time of day or night. And this house was heavily, it wasn't apparently guarded by in-person security guards, but it was monitored by multiple different locations of police officers who were able to dispatch pretty quickly, although Paul did have to call 911, so apparently it wasn't that closely monitored. They did have security cameras, at least. That's pretty much what we can say for sure, but Geez, wow. Okay. Well, I personally am glad that Paul Pelosi is better after that, and I hope that San Franciscans will view this as the huge problem it is. So I want to hop now to this horrible story out of, where is this coming from? Louisville, I think it is. So Van Jones wrote this ridiculous piece with this headline that I thought that you guys would all enjoy. The police who killed Tyree Nichols were black, but they might still have been driven by racism. And we're going to actually read his articles and see what exactly Van Jones is saying to make this case. Let me see if I can close that. Okay, there we go. Editor's note, Van Jones is a CNN host, political commentator, and founder of Dream.org, a national nonprofit dedicated to criminal justice reform. The views expressed in this commentary are his own. Yeah, that headline was really, wow, really something. 3 decades ago, when 4 white Los Angeles police officers were videotaped beating Rodney King, the public outcry was heard around the world. In fact, I got arrested for the first time in my life during the protests that followed, and I subsequently dedicated my career as a lawyer to helping sue rogue cops, close prisons, and reform the criminal justice system. It was a defining moment for the nation and the world. What happened to King was horrifying, but at least he survived the ordeal. Tyree Nichols, tragically, did not survive his. The 29-year-old black man died earlier this month after a police traffic stop and violent arrest in Memphis, Tennessee. According to preliminary results of an autopsy commissioned by attorneys for Nichols' family, he suffered extensive bleeding caused by a severe beating. On Friday, Nichols' mother, Rovon Wells, told CNN, "It is still like a nightmare." I'm sure it is. It's terrible when your son dies. Since the news of Nichols' death was made known, the world has been holding its collective breath in anticipation of the release of video that captured the violent assault and the possibility of a new outpouring of protests spilling into the streets across the country. Van Jones misspelled rioting. That is not protesting. People are not worried about protests. People are worried about riots. That video is expected to be released Friday evening. May be released within the next 40 minutes, from my understanding. 5 former Memphis police officers fired for their alleged actions during Nichols' arrest have now been indicted on charges including kidnapping and murder. On Friday, Memphis Police Chief Saralyn C.J. Davis told CNN, and this is crazy what she had to say because she is not calming things down. "I was in law enforcement during the Rodney King incident, and it's very much aligned with that same type of behavior. I would say it's about the same, if not worse." So her job is supposed to be to calm the public and keep the peace. She's doing neither of those things, and she should be dismissed with prejudice. On Thursday, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Director David Rausch described being sickened by what I saw. Yeah, he's also doing a great job there. By all accounts, Nichols was a good guy, a 145-pound skateboarder, Instagram photographer, Starbucks aficionado. Learning that your child's life was senselessly stolen from him is every black parent's nightmare. I would think it's every parent's nightmare, but thank you, Van, for continuing to push the race card. But surprisingly to many people, the 5 officers charged with viciously beating him were also black. How do we explain Nichols' horrific killing, allegedly at the hands of police who looked like him? You only need to ask this question if you only view every incident through the lens of race. What if I told you, Van, that you don't have to do that? What if you accepted that there could be different reasons for what happened to people? Yes, even black people. What if we considered that there might actually just be a problem with the way police police? Interesting. Couldn't be us. From the King beating to the murder nearly 3 years ago of George Floyd, American society has often focused on the race of the officers, so often white, as a factor in their deplorable acts of violence. Yes, including you, Van, who are writing this article titled "Why They Might Have Still Been Racist Even Though They Were Black." But the narrative white cop kills unarmed black man should never have been the sole lens through which we attempted to understand police abuse and misconduct. Yes, and yet here we are, Van, doing the exact same thing. It's time to move to a more nuanced discussion of the way police violence endangers black lives. Black people are not immune to anti-black messages. Okay, here we go. Here's the critical theory. One of the sad facts about anti-black racism is that black people ourselves are not immune to its pernicious effects. Society's message that black people are inferior, unworthy, and dangerous is pervasive. Over many decades, numerous experiments have shown that these ideas can infiltrate black minds as well as white. Self-hatred is a real thing. Well, it turns out that self-hatred is a real thing for white people too. And I don't know, Van, if you know, but people are affected similarly by being told that their race is bad. So if you're going to push the idea that all white people are all bad and everything bad is a result of the color of their skin, they're going to have the same problems that these people do, according to you. That's why a black store owner might regard customers of his same race with suspicion. No, that's probably just because he's up on the crime data in his area, while treating his white patrons with deference. Black people can harbor anti-black sentiments and can act on those feelings in harmful ways. Sure, I won't disagree with that. Black cops are often socialized in police departments that view certain neighborhoods as war zones. Black cops are socialized in police departments that know crime data. And I'm sorry that crime predominantly tends to affect black neighborhoods. It's a problem that we should all be serious about addressing. If you're serious about addressing the fact that these neighborhoods are considered war zones, you should look at black fatherhood rates and you should start doing everything in your power to incentivize black men to take responsibility for the lives that they bring into the world. Honestly, you should look at the way Planned Parenthood targets black neighborhoods. You should look at the way black women are indoctrinated to believe that abortion is the magic pill to cure all their problems, which led to, in 2018, the article about more black babies in New York City being aborted than born, written by a black author. This is all something that Van Jones could be doing, but instead, all he's doing is say that saying is that this is all due to racism, even though the cops were black. Couldn't possibly be any other reason. He almost had a moment of clarity when he said maybe we should look at this through a lens other than that of race, but then he continued to do the exact same thing. But let's continue. We will give him the benefit of the doubt. Cops of all colors, including black police officers, internalize those messages and sometimes act on them. In fact, in black neighborhoods, the phenomenon of brutal black cops singling out young black men for abuse is nothing new. Back in 1989, the rap group NWA highlighted the problem in a classic hip-hop anthem in which Ice Cube rapped, but don't let it be a black and white cop, because they'll slam you down to the street top. Black police showing out for the white cop. I don't even know how to translate that. When it comes to police violence, race does matter, but possibly not the way you think. At the end of the day, it is the race of the victim who is brutalized, not the race of the violent cop, that is most relevant in determining racial bias as a factor in police violence. It's hard to imagine 5 cops of any color beating a white person to death under similar circumstances, and it is almost impossible to imagine 5 black cops giving a white arrestee the kind of beatdown that Nichols allegedly received. Now I'm curious how many cops are black. Stricter oversight is needed regardless of the race of the officers. Okay, finally, a shred of common sense in this ridiculous article. In short, racist animus can still be a factor even when the perpetrators are all black. And that's especially true if these actions are part of a broader pattern in practice within the Memphis Police Department. It's a sad fact, but one that's as old as time itself. People often oppress people who look just like them. Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, Black Africans sold Black Africans into slavery on a really regular basis. White Russians sold White Russians into slavery. That's why the root word of slave is Slav. The vast majority of human rights abuses are committed by people who look exactly like the people they are abusing. He is correct on that count. Well, who has not watched the video of her son's beating, who has not watched the video of her son's beating, I don't blame her, told CNN through tears that she feels sorry for the officers. They have put their own families in harm's way. They brought shame to their own families. They brought shame to the Black community. I really feel sorry for them because they didn't have to do this. Regardless of the officer's race, Wells also noted to CNN that violence like what happened to our son is about how some bad cops use their power over Black and brown victims. Okay, if you say so. The key to reducing the incidence of police violence is a stricter oversight and swifter punishment. I am glad that the offending officers were quickly fired and charged. We need more of that, and not just when the cops are black. Civil rights advocates once pushed for more racial integration in police departments in hopes that more black cops would lead to less police brutality. But while racial integration is important for basic fairness and opportunity, it is not a panacea against police abuse. I'm not as familiar with that word as I probably should be. Panacea against police abuse. Any system needs to put into place adequate checks and balances. Yes, correct. Without meat inspectors, you would see a lot more food poisoning. Without building inspectors, you would see a lot more buildings falling down. And policing is just as much, even more, in need of a rigorous internal monitoring that roots out bad cops and holds the entire police department to the highest standards of conduct. I can agree with that. Unless there is real oversight with real consequences for wrongdoing, bad actors will take advantage, lower the practical standards of everyone, and put all of us at risk. And without aggressive oversight and swift punishment, we'll continue to see stomach-churning acts of police violence against black men by cops of every color. Okay, well, in spite of that ridiculous headline, that actually wasn't the worst article you could possibly read on the topic. I think that his conclusion that we definitely need much stricter oversight is definitely true. I think that police brutality against anyone of any race is problematic. Obviously, there is no reason for the state to have this kind of power and to have this kind of threat of force. Andy's constantly talking about how the state is the embodiment of the threat of force. And that's completely true, especially when it comes to police officers. I just thought that was interesting. And as we mentioned earlier, the police chief is doing nothing to dissuade this kind of panic and this possible rioting. It seems to me like she's actually pushing some kind of a race war. Let's look at Jemelle Hill. I think she also works for CNN. No, she writes for The Atlantic. Oh gosh. Okay. Noam Bloom comments on her tweet. He says, "It's so backwards that in the face of narrative-breaking evidence, the conclusion is violent black cops are also white supremacy and not police brutality, while sometimes motivated by either systemic or individual acts of racism, is actually a larger problem than just that." See, that's what Van Jones concluded. Van Jones is in agreement with Noam Bloom. Unfortunately, Jemelle Hill does not have that modicum of nuance that Van had. And Van in the past has said very reasonable things about like the network's bias against Trump. So he is not a crazy person. Jemelle Hill says, "I need so many people to understand this regarding Tyree Nichols." Okay. Several of the police officers who murdered Freddie Gray were black. The entire system of policing is based on white supremacist violence. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She can only see the world through her very narrow lens, and that can only let her see white supremacy everywhere. And she herself has been indoctrinated by critical race theory, because critical race theory excludes all other possible explanations. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard enough to teach people this without critical race theory. There are always dozens and dozens and dozens of reasons for why things happen the way they do. It's never black and white. And this is why I hate tribalism. It is never clear cut. No one is 100% good or 100% bad. And this is why this flavors all of my thinking, because I take every point of truth I can from every conceivable person I can follow. It's always in my best interest to look for what truth anyone brings, regardless of what other things they think. If Jemelle Hill came out and said something insanely smart and incredibly based, I would be totally on board. I'd be like, you know what? She has a modicum of truth in her. There's a little tiny bit of light in each of us. Let's continue. "We see people under the boot of oppression carry its water all the time." Yeah, see, and this is exactly what Bree is saying too. Diversifying the police force doesn't end racism, because racism is inherent to the organization of the institution and its daily operation. Racism is what policing is. So this person, if they weren't looking through the lens of racism 24/7, could almost be a super, super strong libertarian. They could be saying something like, the threat of force is what policing is. That's actually true. See, that doesn't depend on racism to make it true. It doesn't depend on your pet peeve to make it so. Here's a way to tell if you're looking at the world properly or not. If it turns out that everybody bad is your ideological enemy and everybody good is your ideological friend, there might be something wrong with the way you're viewing the world. honestly. And this is part of the problem with the left, but part of what makes them so efficacious. They are able to agree on everything. Everything. They genuinely think they're on the right side of history, and everyone who agrees with them also on the right side of history, therefore a friend. Everyone who disagrees, enemy. Wrong side of history, get away from me. It makes them very, very effective, but it's incorrect. It's completely incorrect. You have to use the level of nuance, which I am not unwilling to say Van Jones was willing to put into effect at the end of his article. I disagree with him on pretty much everything else, but I agree with his conclusion that no matter the race of police officers, they need to face accountability for their actions, no matter what. If you're going to have policing, you're going to require accountability for what they do. If you're not going to have policing, you're going to have to figure out another way to deal with all this stuff. So when the left calls to get rid of police, they're not offering any kind of alternative, which is usually my biggest issue with them. But let's see what you guys are thinking. Let me switch over my camera here, make it a little easier for you guys to see. There we go. Something about pigeons. We'll get to that shortly. Goodness gracious. Okay. Waiting room and intro outro music by Nightmare, Nitemirror. That's correct, and that's from Andy. Somebody says, ooh, I'm French. Tony says, I don't think eating cheese before bed causes nightmare. Yes, it's a wives' tale. They're trying to figure out if it's true. This is just gaslighting. They want to take away our cheese. No, how dare they? Somebody says, no, don't. The feds will take our cheese. Vegan cheese isn't cheese. Entirely correct. I eat cheese before I go Z's. No harsh dreams. That's poetic. I love it. Patch to like and share, y'all. That's right. PCC is still on. Hostage party. Ooh, exciting. Andy says, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and switch from top chat to live chat. Yes, that's right. Planet Fatness says, I like to call it COVID hysteria, not the pandemic. Gabriel says the dude freaked out that he got caught. Yeah, I think that was the case for sure. He was like, I was lying. I was just making something up. I was just trying to impress my date. Yeah, okay, whatever. Tony says it would make sense for them to do this, no different than car manufacturers specifically designing specific parts to fail for repair and have those parts readily available, all about making money. I agree. It does make sense. And this is what I talk about when I mention that the capitalism we have today is unmoored from ethics and morals. Like, it's actually a really big problem that we don't have guiding principles behind our thirst to make money. Somebody says Project Veritas. Yes, that's where we're at. There you go. Milk for summer sweet, cheese for winter meat. Interesting. I've never heard that term. Dude thought he was going to get laid, but he got made. Bump, bump. I appreciate Marsha Blackburn. Grateful she's my senator. Yeah, for sure. Keenan says, my favorite cheese is made in Vermont. Cabot, lactose-free. Interesting. I did not know that Cabot was lactose-free. I've seen it before. Favorite cheese is Gouda. I love Gouda. One of my spicier takes, I have a few, is that pepper jack cheese is not good. And I recently tried it again, and I have to admit, it is still not good. I still don't like it. But this doesn't mean anything. It just means there's more pepper jack cheese for you guys who love it. Quantum Strange Quark says, my favorite cheese is extra sharp cheddar. Extra sharp is great. I love Colby Jack. It's a little smoother. Tony says, reminds me of the song Clowns to the Left of Me, Jokers to the Right, for sure. Brie is obviously the superior cheese. Brie's a little too soft for me. Keenan says, sun visors are great cash cows. Just convince everyone the sun is always shining. The sun will kill you. Government requires you to buy visors. There you go. I want to try Limburger. I've never tried Limburger. Somebody says ear and nose. Not sure. Just got done with PCC. I'm sure it was great. The federal government is out of control. Yes, I agree. This is a good generic statement. Save grandma. Yes, the Great Barrington Declaration was actually the idea behind the Save Grandma campaign, which was very interesting. All the old timers need to come back out of retirement. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Dolph Manatee says gay tryst gone wrong. I don't think so based on the pictures. Like, David is fully dressed. He's wearing shorts. He's wearing his hoodie. He's got a hammer in his hand. He's wearing his shoes, for Pete's sake. You can see him breaking into the back window. Like, there's the camera footage came out, and it's pretty clear that this wasn't any kind of tryst. Planet Fatness says, I too won't spill my drink while being assaulted. So he actually did spill his drink while being assaulted. And David did not actually attack him until after the police showed up. He moved pretty fast. So it looked like Paul had kind of calmed him down a little bit. He had his drink in his hand. He had like been talking to him apparently for some time. Remember when he called the police, we were like so confused because it sounded like he was with somebody he knew. And I'm willing to bet that he was really, really trying to calm this guy down who's apparently super drugged out of his mind. And yes, fully dressed. And Paul was wearing his boxers and his pajama shirt. This all looks very consistent to me. I'm not very given to conspiracy theories surrounding this especially. Freedom of speech was the only thing that matters to me. It's a good rule of thumb. Somebody says the Constitution. Pelosi wanted an exorcism to get rid of the ghost that opened the door. Both of his hands were full. How did the door open? Both of Paul's hands weren't full. He had a drink in one hand. That's how he opened the door. And then David was holding the hammer. He had a hammer in one hand. So it's possible David might have even opened the door. I'm not sure. But it looks like the security video showed him break. Yep, the security video showed him break him to the house with a hammer. That's correct. I wonder how many times this article will mention Trump. It didn't mention him at all. Van Jones doesn't actually have very bad TDS. It's kind of interesting. He was the one, I think, who admitted that CNN was going to go for the climate crisis next. I believe that was him. I can't recall. Sometimes wish I had actual bare arms. For sure, me too. I've actually seen black on black racism happen. Yeah, I'm sure it's a thing. I don't think that Van is wrong about this. I always want to emphasize the importance of culture. I am not racist because I firmly believe that what they have in the black community is a cultural problem, because I've met many Nigerians and Kenyans. They are fantastically motivated to work and stunningly in pursuit of the American dream. It is not an issue of the amount of melanin in their skin. It's their culture. Kenya and Nigeria are very strongly influenced by Christian morals and ethics, likely from the British influence from colonization. But when those people come to the US, they are some of the highest earning immigrants in the country because they seriously want what the US has to offer, and they really care about making the most of themselves, which honestly, good for them. I had no complaints. Well, I had slight complaints about the male Kenyan coworkers that I used to have because they were way too forward with me. Did not love that at all. Liz just rolled a 20, constantly rolling 20s. What can I say? I'm not sure what you're referring to, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would go back and emphasize it. Finally catching it live. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad you're here, Jose. I'm out. Goodbye, Control WQ. It was nice to have you here. Tony says there are AI YouTube channels popping up. I subbed to a few and they were good, but now I know what to look for and unsub them. Just saying, be careful. Interesting. Wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure that all creators will be pushed right out of the market by AI. And I saw that BuzzFeed was, oh my gosh, did I put that in my headline? I don't even remember. Let me see here. Yep. No, I was going to put it in my headline and then I ended up changing it. Yeah. So BuzzFeed is starting to release articles written by AI. So that's like ChatGPT. This is very interesting. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. All right, you guys, we're going to talk about what should be done. Can anything be done to assuage rural rage? This is from Paul Krugman. If you ever forget his name, as I did, just Google economist often wrong. And you'll likely come up with Paul Krugman because he's wrong about everything. If he told me the sky was blue, I would look up to check for myself. Let's read what issue this laptop class member has with the rural residents of his country. Rural resentment has become a central fact of American politics, in particular a pillar of support for the rise of right-wing extremism. Oh gosh, we're off to a roaring start. Let's go. As the Republican Party has moved even further into MAGA land, it has lost votes among educated suburban voters. Oh yeah, that's us. We are the educated. Oh, you poor uneducated plebs. You're worthless. But this has been offset by a drastic rightward shift in rural areas, which in some places has gone so far that the Democrats who remain face intimidation and are afraid to reveal their party affiliation. Wow! Can you imagine how Republicans in D.C. feel about telling people that they're Republicans? Neither can I. I'm sure they don't feel any kind of fear. But is this shift permanent? Can anything be done to assuage rural rage? The answer will depend on two things: whether it's possible to improve rural lives and restore rural communities, and whether the voters in these communities will give politicians credit for any improvements that do take place. Politicians do not deserve credit for pretty much anything. They are employees of the citizens of the country. They deserve performance reviews. They might deserve raises if their constituents think that they've done a fantastic job, but they don't deserve credit for making change. The people who put them in office deserve the credit for that. And whether they followed through on their campaign promises, also down to their constituents. And, well, honestly, down to their personal sense of truth-telling. This week, my colleague Thomas B. Edsall surveyed research on the rural Republican shift. I was struck by his summary of work from Catherine J. Kramer, who attributes rural resentment to perceptions that rural areas are ignored by policymakers. They don't get their fair share of resources. They don't, and are disrespected by city folks. Oh, you mean by Paul Krugman right at the opening of this freaking article? Okay, let's continue. As it happens, all three perceptions are largely wrong. Oh, Paul is here to tell you that people like him don't disrespect you. Never mind that this whole article is disrespecting you personally. I'm sure that my saying this will generate a tidal wave of hate mail. Good, it should. And lecturing rural Americans about policy reality isn't going to move their votes. No, it's not. Why are you doing it? Who are you speaking to? Are you speaking to rural people? No, you're speaking to your neighbors who are also in their pajamas, on their laptops, in their fancy DC high-rises. Nonetheless, it's important to get our facts straight. Yeah, I'm sure Paul Krugman really cares about truth. The truth is that ever since the New Deal, rural America has received special treatment from policymakers. Has it? Really interesting. It's not just farm subsidies, which ballooned under Donald Trump to the point where they accounted for 40% of total farm income. Rural America also benefits from special programs that support housing, utilities, and business in general. Yeah, you know why you might want to support rural America? Because that's where Paul Krugman's food comes from. I'm just saying, that's also where truckers tend to live, who bring the food into the cities for the rich, educated, worthy elite people. The intelligentsia, Thomas Sowell used to call them. The truth is, in terms of resources, major federal programs disproportionately benefit rural areas, in part because such areas have a disproportionate number of seniors receiving Social Security and Medicare. You're sure that it's not because those are the places that food comes from? Not sure. But even means-tested programs that Republicans often disparage as welfare, tilt rural. Notably, at this point, rural Americans are more likely than urban Americans to be on Medicaid and receive food stamps. Can you think of why somebody might choose to live in a rural setting, Paul? Because I can. I worked with people who chose to live in rural settings and drove miles to work every single day. You know why? Because it's cheap. It is cheaper to live in the country. Poor people live in the ghettos in big cities, and they live in the country. The truth is that ever since, in terms of resources, major federal programs disproportionately, but even means tested, notably at this point, rural Americans are more likely. And because rural America is poorer than urban America, it pays much less per person in federal taxes. So in practice, major metropolitan areas hugely subsidize the countryside. Again, going to circle back to the concept of food coming from the countryside. Not that Paul needs food. These subsidies don't just support incomes, they support economies. Government and the so-called healthcare and social assistance sector each employ more people in rural America than agriculture. And who do you think pays for those jobs? What about rural perceptions of being disrespected? Well, many people have negative views about people with different lifestyles. That's human nature. This is like the first true thing Paul said here. There is, however, an unwritten rule in American politics that it's okay for politicians to seek rural votes by insulting big cities and their residents. But it would be unforgivable for urban politicians to return the favor. I have to go to New York City soon, tweeted J.D. Vance during his senatorial campaign. I have heard it's disgusting and violent there. It is. It is. It is disgusting and violent in New York City. Anne and I went to New York City for the Minds event back in like September. It was disgusting. I'm glad that we didn't see any of the violence, but I was terrified to go on the subway. It is an incredibly disturbing place, especially after the pandemic, and it's not partisan to say that. They have a serious problem with violence there, and Eric Adams, their mayor, will tell you exactly that. In fact, that's what he was elected to help fix. He was elected because he was a former policeman who was going to take a tough on crime stance, much like Rudy Giuliani during, I think, the late 80s, early 90s, that actually really helped the city recover a little bit from some of its violence. So the fact is kind of contrary to the blue narrative, which Paul cannot stand. So he's writing this whole article about it. Can you imagine, say, Chuck Schumer saying something similar about rural Ohio, even as a joke? Do you guys recall when Chuck Schumer said that we weren't having enough kids and therefore we had to bring more immigrants in? Pepperidge Farm remembers. Remember when the Great Replacement theory was supposedly a far-right talking point that only far-right crazy people were discussing? Yeah, Pepperidge Farm remembers. So the ostensible justification for rural resentment don't withstand scrutiny. Yeah, okay, I don't think that you can make it this far in this article and think that Paul Krugman doesn't hate your guts if you don't live in a big city. But that doesn't mean things are fine. A changing economy has increasingly favored metropolitan areas with large college-educated workforces over small towns. The rural working age population has been declining, leaving seniors behind. Rural men in their prime working years are much more likely than their metropolitan counterparts to not be working. Rural woes are real. Okay, so be compassionate. Ironically, however, the policy agenda of the party most rural voters support would make things even worse, slashing their safety net programs these voters depend on. And Democrats shouldn't be afraid to point this out. I'm sure they do on a regular basis. But can they also have a positive agenda for rural renewal? As the Washington Post's Greg Sargent is the only person who is slightly more heinous than Paul Krugman. Really incredible stuff. Recently pointed out, the infrastructure spending bills enacted under President Biden, while primarily intended to address climate change, will also create large numbers of blue-collar jobs in rural areas and small cities. Oh yeah, Joe Biden, president of the working class. They are in practice a form of the place-based industrial policy some economists have urged to fight America's growing geographic disparities. Will they work? The economic forces that have been hollowing out rural America are deep and not easily countered. That's true. But it's certainly worth trying. But even if these policies improve rural fortunes, will Democrats get any credit? They don't deserve credit. Like I said earlier, politicians don't deserve credit. Politicians work at the pleasure of the people who elect them. It's easy to be cynical. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the new governor of Arkansas, has pledged to get the bureaucratic tyrants out of Washington out of your wallets. In 2019, the federal government spent almost twice as much in Arkansas as it collected in taxes, de facto providing the average Arkansas resident with $5,500 in aid. So even if Democratic policies greatly improve rural lives, will rural voters notice? Hopefully not. Still, anything that helps reverse rural America's decline would be a good thing in itself. Why? The whole body of this article has just been you spewing how much you despise the people who vote for your political opposition, which are largely the people who live in rural settings. And maybe, just maybe, reducing the heartland's economic desperation will also help reverse its political radicalization. Okay, so Paul Krugman has not stopped being full of nonsense. He's very old. He's very wrong. I can't believe he's won awards for his economics stuff. Nonsense. Total nonsense. I was hoping that there would be something redeeming in this article. Bunch of nonsense. Paul Krugman is a crazy person that nobody likes. Speaking of crazy people, here we are to talk about Jill Biden coaching Joe Biden away from journalist questions. Nobody elected the First Lady. Republican criticizes Jill Biden for stopping husband Joe from doing his job by blocking him from reporters asking questions about the classified documents debacle. Former GOP Representative Doug Collins criticized Jill Biden Friday for stepping in between President Joe Biden and reporters at a Thursday evening event. 100%. Everyone should be criticizing her for that. That isn't her place. Journalists shouted questions at Biden about whether he'd permit a search to be conducted for classified documents at his Rehoboth Beach home. This has really gotten concerning because nobody, frankly, in all fairness to the First Lady, nobody elected her to answer questions, Collins said on Fox. That's entirely accurate. The Bidens hosted a Lunar New Year event Thursday evening in the East Room, and as they departed, ignored a slew of questions about the classified documents discovery, including whether the president would greenlight a search of the Rehoboth Beach farm. So here she is, pushing him away from questions. First Lady Jill Biden stepped between reporters and her husband as they departed the White House's Lunar New Year celebration Thursday night. Earlier, Dr. Biden coaxed the president on stage to mark the conclusion of a dragon dance performance. This couple makes me such a combination of furious and depressed. It's really hard to express. Jill Biden, I think, should be probably put on trial for elder abuse. The fact that she decided to push Joe into this when he's clearly beyond his mental capacity is just morally defunct. Honestly disgusting. But she made it happen anyway. Oh, here she is wearing drapes. Once again, lovely, lovely taste. Everything that the Biden administration has done lately has been super depressing. But the GOP has not been much better. Trump congratulates McDaniel on RNC chair re-election. How's that swamp draining going? Ronna McDaniel has presided over some of the worst elections for the GOP in recent memory. And Trump just touted her re-election. He endorsed her, then he endorsed Mike Lindell. Trump made a point of not ever endorsing Harmeet Dillon, which most people really wanted because Ronna McDaniel does a terrible job. But here we go. Ronna McDaniel won her election and Trump was behind it. So I wish them the best for sure. I'm sure that we'll win more elections after this because of Ronna. But let's hop over to some good news. Pediatric group ordered to provide Florida docs on why it supports sex changes for kids. This is fantastic news. This isn't all that DeSantis has been up to either. Ron DeSantis has floated the idea of reintroducing the concept of a death penalty for child sexual assault in his state. And he brought this up in light of the decision about the Parkland shooter because he almost got the death penalty. 8 out of 12 jurors were in favor of it. 4 were not. Therefore, he did not get it. And Ron DeSantis did not like that. And I don't blame him for not liking that. And I'm not going to talk more about the child sexual assault thing because that will surely raise everyone's blood pressure. So let's talk about the good news that DeSantis is bringing us. The American Academy of Pediatrics must provide the state of Florida with documentation on why it supports gender transitions for minors and any communication with its members about the decision-making process, a district court ruled. The AAP is involved in a lawsuit against Florida over a new rule established last year that prohibits the use of Medicaid funds to sex changes and other transgender-related care. Thank you, Daily Caller, so much for not using the term gender-affirming care. That's not what it is. It's a sex change and it's transgender-related care. The AAP signed on in support of the plaintiffs, leading Florida to subpoena it and numerous other organizations for information on their policies toward individuals with gender dysphoria and how those policies were developed, as first reported by the Daily Caller. Good for the Daily Caller. Thursday, Judge Carl J. Nichols ordered the AAP to turn over information on its total number of members, documents on how it establishes guidelines and policy positions, any guidelines or policy positions on gender-affirming care for gender dysphoria, and how those guidelines or policies were developed to the state of Florida by February 2nd. The organization must also share any official communications it had with its members about those policies and guidelines. Gender-affirming care is a euphemism for medical procedures and treatments that facilitate gender transition like sex change operations or hormone therapy. Activists initially filed for a preliminary injunction against the Medicaid rule last year, but that request was denied in October when Judge Jackson Hinkle ruled the question at hand was one for the Medicaid statutes, not the Constitution. According to its website, the AAP recommends that youth who identify as transgender have access to comprehensive gender-affirming and developmentally appropriate health care that is provided in a safe and inclusive clinical space. Wow. I'm so glad that they are getting these files. The organization has opposed legislation and rules backed by Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis aimed at curbing access to care that facilitates sex changes for children. I can't believe we're here. I can't believe that we are honestly having this conversation about sex changes for children. But here we are, and thankfully, Ron DeSantis is rising to the occasion. It also opposes laws that prohibit biological males from playing on female sports teams. Let's check out this article real quick. I'm not sure when this is from. Oh, this is from recently. Oh, this is from last year. Okay, DeSantis says he would ban transgender surgeries for minors. Okay, so this looks like the outcropping of that initial promise, and I'm very glad that he's doing it, for sure. Oh, goodness. Okay, I just talked a whole lot. Thank you guys all so much for still being with me. I do appreciate that. I'm sorry we had to read that Paul Krugman article, but I think it's important to know exactly what we're up against. Andy says Q for some reason. Jacob says Ugandans and Kenyans are dope AF. I agree. Nigerians, Kenyans, Ugandans, super based people. Very, very religiously oriented. They have very strong moral convictions, and that doesn't stop their men from being super forward with American women. They lack the concept of American cultural norms in that regard. But because they are so culturally different, I wasn't too concerned about it. I just didn't like it very much, and it did make me uncomfortable. Farmers are the foundation of our society. No farmers, no food. Correct. Scott says, I can't understand how Nixon was reelected. I don't know anyone who voted for him. I'm not sure either. Jacob says, surprise, Republicans are increasingly the actual liberals now. Casey says, have you ever known the guy that lived at the top of the hill? I like saying the one I know has a 4th grade education, LMAO. Serenko Production says, I don't know anyone who voted for him either, but I'm also Gen Z. Yeah, I certainly don't know anyone who voted for Nixon. And Tony says, oh my lord, they are trying to stir the pot here. That's for sure. Yep, hello. Keaton is ballin', says hi lids. Hello, Keaton. Appreciate your time. That's paraphrasing of what a New York Times columnist wrote back when he was reelected in a landslide. Oh, the type of which we'll not see again. Right. Remember the journalist who said he doesn't know anyone who owns an F-150, excuse me. I think that's probably our generation's closest analog, because so many people own F-150s. He just didn't know anyone who was close enough to like a rural lifestyle to want to own an F-150. All right, you guys, it's been a crazy week. I expect another crazy week next time. You guys should 100% go and check out Making the Argument with Nick Freitas on YouTube. That's the podcast that I help produce long distance. We have a good time over there. We talk about awesome stuff, and I have an opportunity to pitch in over there as well. It's very gratifying. You guys should investigate it for sure. We just crossed 200,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, and Nick J. Freitas on Instagram is also a wonderful source of those short videos that we've been seeing everywhere. They're super popular and very impactful. Thank you guys all so much again for joining me this week. I am looking forward to next week as we are getting closer and closer to spring. It's so close I can taste it. Looking forward to seeing all those spring plants coming up. And when we get our puppy, you guys will be the first to know. I will definitely show you as soon as I got her. You guys can check her out over on Instagram.com/thelighterdips, LEITERDIPS. And until next time, bye guys. How's it going?